The rain hammered against the office windows like accusations, and Lucas Hale stood in the empty parking lot realizing he'd made a catastrophic mistake. His boss, the woman who could fire him with a single word, had just offered him shelter from the storm, and his exhausted brain had responded with what might be the stupidest joke of his life. "Is there room for two?" The silence that followed those four words stretched like a chasm, and Lucas felt his entire fragile world teetering on the edge of collapse. A single father with an infant son surviving on fumes and desperation, he'd just crossed a line with the one person who held his livelihood in her hands. Before we dive into how one careless moment exposed everything Lucas had been hiding, I want to invite you to stick with this story until the end. If it resonates with you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with all of you. The fluorescent lights of Meridian Analytics hummed their monotonous song as Lucas Hale pressed his palms against his desk, fighting the wave of exhaustion that threatened to pull him under. His eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets for the past 11 hours, the numbers blurring into meaningless symbols. He blinked hard, forcing focus, because focus was all he had left. Across the open office floor, most desks sat empty. The after-hours crowd thinned to just a handful of people, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of computer screens. Lucas glanced at his watch. 8:47 p.m. His chest tightened. He'd promised Mrs. Chen he'd pick up Noah by 9, and he was still at least 20 minutes from finishing the quarterly analysis Marianne Cole needed first thing tomorrow morning. His phone buzzed against the desk, a text from Mrs. Chen. "Running a bit late myself. Can go until 9:30 if needed." Lucas exhaled slowly, the knot in his shoulders loosening just slightly. 30 extra minutes. He could work with that. He typed back a quick thank you, then returned to the spreadsheet, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Still here, Hale?" The voice cut through his concentration like a knife. Lucas looked up to find Marianne Cole standing 3 feet from his desk, her tailored charcoal suit somehow still crisp despite the late hour. At 41, she carried herself with the kind of authority that made grown men straighten their spines without thinking about it. Her dark hair was pulled back in its signature severe bun, and her sharp gray eyes assessed him with the same analytical precision she applied to everything else. "Just finishing the Patterson analysis," Lucas said, sitting up straighter despite himself. "It'll be on your desk by 9. I didn't ask for a status report." Marianne's expression didn't shift. "I asked if you were still here." "Yes, ma'am, I'm still here." She studied him for a moment longer, and Lucas fought the urge to look away. There was something unsettling about being the focus of Marianne Cole's attention, like being examined under a microscope, every flaw and weakness suddenly visible. "The analysis can wait until morning," she said finally. "Go home to your son." Lucas felt heat creep up his neck. He'd been careful, so careful, to keep his personal life separate from work. He'd never mentioned Noah in meetings, never used his son as an excuse for anything, never allowed a single crack in his professional facade to show. But of course she knew. Marianne Cole knew everything that happened in her company. "I appreciate that," he said carefully, "but I'm almost done. Another 15 minutes. 15 minutes? Marianne's lips pressed into a thin line. "You say that like you're in control of your time. You're not. You're barely in control of staying conscious." The observation landed with brutal accuracy. Lucas had been running on less than 4 hours of sleep for the past 3 weeks, ever since Noah had developed an ear infection that turned nights into a blur of crying and pacing and desperate attempts to soothe. The antibiotics had finally kicked in, but Lucas's sleep debt hadn't magically vanished. "I'm managing," he said, the words coming out more defensive than he'd intended. "You're surviving." Marianne crossed her arms. "There's a difference." Before Lucas could formulate a response, the lights flickered. Both of them looked up at the ceiling as the fluorescent tubes buzzed ominously. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening. "Storm's moving in faster than predicted," Marianne observed. "You should leave now." Lucas glanced toward the wall of windows that made up the eastern side of the office. Dark clouds had swallowed the evening sky, and rain was beginning to streak against the glass in wind-driven sheets. He pulled out his phone and checked the weather app. The screen lit up with a severe thunderstorm warning, yellow and red patches spreading across the radar map like a disease. "Yeah," he muttered. "Definitely time to go." He saved his work and shut down his computer with quick, practiced movements. Marianne hadn't moved, still watching him with that unsettling focus. "You take the train?" she asked. Lucas nodded as he shrugged into his jacket. "Red Line to Forest Glen, then the 214 bus. That's an hour and 20 minutes in good weather. Hour and 35 tonight, probably." Lucas tried to keep his tone light, like the commute was no big deal, like he wasn't already calculating whether Mrs. Chen would charge him extra for the late pickup, and whether he could afford it if she did. "It's 8:50, Marianne said. "The storm will be in full force by the time you reach the station. I've gotten wet before." "I'm sure you have." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that reminded Lucas of a predator considering its options. "My car is in the executive garage. I can drop you." The offer caught Lucas completely off guard. He stared at her, trying to process the idea of Marianne Cole, the woman who once made a senior analyst cry during a presentation, offering him a ride home like they were colleagues who carpooled. "That's not necessary," he said automatically. "I didn't ask if it was necessary. I offered you a ride." "I appreciate it, but—" "Hale!" Marianne's voice sharpened. "I'm not going to stand here and debate with you while the storm gets worse. Accept the ride or don't. Decide." Lucas hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The truth was, getting home faster meant more time with Noah before bedtime, meant not arriving soaking wet and shivering, meant not burning through energy he didn't have to spare. But accepting help from Marianne Cole felt dangerous in a way he couldn't quite articulate. The lights flickered again, and the decision was made for him. "Thank you," Lucas said. "I'd appreciate the ride." Marianne nodded once, crisp and efficient. 5 minutes. Front entrance. She turned and walked toward her office without waiting for confirmation, her heels clicking against the polished floor with rhythmic precision. Lucas grabbed his bag and headed for the elevator, his mind already racing ahead to the awkward car ride that awaited him. The executive garage was a different world from the employee parking lot where Lucas usually left his beat-up Honda. Sleek luxury vehicles sat in marked spaces under bright LED lights, protected from the elements by reinforced concrete. Marianne's car turned out to be a black Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than Lucas made in 2 years. She was already behind the wheel when he emerged from the building, the engine purring quietly. Lucas slid into the passenger seat, immediately aware of how out of place he felt. The interior smelled like leather and something subtle and expensive, probably whatever high-end detailing service the wealthy used. "Address?" Marianne asked, her phone already open to the navigation app. Lucas rattled off Mrs. Chen's address in Forest Glen, and Marianne entered it with quick, precise taps. The car pulled smoothly out of the garage and into the storm. Rain hammered against the windshield with such force that the wipers could barely keep up, even on their highest setting. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the storm and the soft classical music coming from the speakers. Lucas kept his gaze fixed on the water-streaked window, watching the city lights blur and smear like a painting left out in the rain. "How old is your son?" Marianne asked suddenly. Lucas turned to look at her, surprised. 8 months? That's a difficult age. They're mobile enough to get into trouble, but not verbal enough to tell you what's wrong. Yeah. Lucas studied her profile, trying to read her expression in the dim light from the dashboard. "You have kids?" "No." The word was flat, offering no invitation for further questions. Lucas took the hint and fell silent again. They were moving slowly now, traffic backed up as drivers navigated the flooded streets with excessive caution. What should have been a 15-minute drive was stretching longer with each passing moment. "The Patterson analysis," Marianne said, her eyes still on the road. "You've been working on it for 3 weeks." It wasn't a question, but Lucas answered anyway. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "It's complex. Multiple revenue streams, inconsistent reporting from their regional offices, some discrepancies in their That's not what I'm asking." Marianne changed lanes with smooth efficiency, slipping the Mercedes into a gap that looked impossibly small. "I'm asking why you've been working on it for 3 weeks when I gave you 6 weeks to complete it." And Lucas felt his stomach sink. "I wanted to get ahead of the deadline, make sure there was time for revisions if needed." You wanted to prove yourself indispensable. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Lucas couldn't deny it. That's exactly what he'd been doing, working harder, faster, longer than anyone else, trying to build a wall of competence so high that no one would ever question whether a single father with an infant could handle the demands of the job. "I'm just trying to do good work," he said quietly. "You're trying to survive." Marianne glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the road. "There's a difference." It was the second time she'd said that, and the repetition stung. Lucas clenched his jaw, swallowing the defensive response that wanted to claw its way out of his throat. "You're angry," Marianne observed. "Good. Anger means you're still capable of feeling something other than exhaustion." "I'm not angry. You're clenching your fists so hard your knuckles are white." Lucas looked down and realized she was right. He forced his hands to relax, spreading his fingers against his thighs. "I'm managing my life just fine." "Really?" Marianne's voice carried a note of skepticism that made Lucas's teeth hurt. "When was the last time you slept more than 5 hours in a night?" "That's personal. Everything about you screams personal crisis, Hale. You look like you're one missed meal away from collapsing. Your hands shake when you think no one's watching. You've lost at least 15 pounds since I hired you 6 months ago, and considering you weren't exactly heavy to begin with, that's concerning." Lucas stared at her, stunned by the litany of observations. "You've been watching me that closely?" "I watch all my employees that closely. It's my job to know when someone's about to break." Marianne took a right turn, and Lucas recognized the neighborhood. They were getting close to Mrs. Chen's house. The difference is most of them have support systems. Partners, parents, friends. You have a babysitter and stubbornness. "I have my son," Lucas said, and the words came out harder than he'd intended. "That's all the support system I need." "No." Marianne's response was immediate and certain. "That's all the responsibility you have. It's not the same thing." Lucas wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but the truth of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. Noah was everything to him. The reason he got up in the morning, the reason he pushed through exhaustion and pain and loneliness. But Marianne was right. His son wasn't his support system. His son was what he was supporting, and there was no one supporting him in return. The Mercedes pulled up in front of Mrs. Chen's modest ranch house, its windows glowing warmly against the storm. Lucas could see her silhouette moving past the front window, probably getting Noah ready for the handoff. "Thank you for the ride," Lucas said, reaching for the door handle. "Hale." He paused, looking back at Marianne. Her expression had softened slightly, though her eyes remained sharp and assessing. "Tomorrow morning, turn in whatever you have on the Patterson analysis. Don't stay late tonight finishing it. Just turn in what you have. It's not complete." "I don't care. Turn it in anyway." Lucas nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the storm, rain immediately soaking through his jacket. He ducked his head and ran for Mrs. Chen's porch, his shoes splashing through puddles. Mrs. Chen opened the door before he could knock, Noah bundled in her arms. The baby's face lit up when he saw Lucas, his chubby arms reaching out immediately. "Dada!" The word, one of only 3 in Noah's current vocabulary, made Lucas's chest ache with a fierce protective love that never quite felt manageable. He took his son carefully, pressing a kiss to the top of Noah's head. "Sorry I'm late," he told Mrs. Chen. "No trouble at all." The older woman smiled warmly. "He ate well, had a good nap, played with his blocks. Very good boy today." Lucas thanked her and paid what he owed, adding an extra 20 for the late pickup. Mrs. Chen protested, but Lucas insisted. She did him the favor of watching Noah when most daycares closed at 6, and that was worth every penny he could spare. Back out in the storm, Lucas shifted Noah to protect him from the rain and hurried down the sidewalk toward the bus stop 3 blocks away. The storm had intensified, wind whipping the rain into diagonal sheets that stung against Lucas's face. Noah whimpered and buried his face against Lucas's shoulder. "It's okay, buddy," Lucas murmured, holding his son tighter. "We're almost home." But they weren't almost home. They were 3 blocks from a bus stop, then a 40-minute bus ride to the train station, then a 20-minute train ride, then another 15-minute walk to their apartment. All told, another hour and a half in the storm with an 8-month-old baby. Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He shifted Noah carefully and pulled it out, expecting a text from Mrs. Chen about something Noah had left behind. Instead, it was from an unknown number. The bus will be delayed at least an hour due to flooding on Riverside. Get back here. Lucas stared at the message, confusion and suspicion warring in his tired brain. He looked back toward Mrs. Chen's house, where the Mercedes still sat at the curb, headlights cutting through the rain. Another text appeared. This is Marianne. Stop being stubborn and get in the car. For a long moment, Lucas just stood there in the rain, Noah's small body warm against his chest. Pride told him to keep walking, to refuse the help, to maintain the fiction that he had everything under control. But Noah chose that moment to let out a small, unhappy cry, and the sound shattered Lucas's resolve. He turned and walked back to the Mercedes. The passenger door opened before he reached it, and Lucas slid gratefully into the dry warmth, settling Noah on his lap. The baby was soaked, his little jacket darkened with water, and Lucas's heart clenched with guilt. I live in Riverside Heights, he said quietly. Building 7, Maple Grove Apartments. Marianne didn't say anything, just entered the new address into her navigation and pulled away from the curb. Noah twisted in Lucas's arms, staring at Marianne with wide, curious eyes. Dada, he said, pointing at Lucas. Then he pointed at Marianne and made a questioning sound. That's Miss Cole, Lucas told him. Say thank you to Miss Cole. Noah, of course, just giggled and grabbed a fistful of Lucas's wet jacket instead. The drive to Riverside Heights took longer than expected, the storm turning familiar roads into obstacle courses of standing water and debris. Marianne navigated it all with calm competence, her hands steady on the wheel. Lucas tried not to think about how safe he felt in this moment, how the warmth of the car and the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers made his exhaustion feel less like drowning and more like just being very, very tired. Noah dozed off against Lucas's chest, his breathing evening out into the soft snuffles of infant sleep. Lucas adjusted his hold, cradling his son with practiced ease. He's a beautiful baby, Marianne said quietly. Thank you. Lucas stroked Noah's damp hair. He's the best thing I ever did. Where's his mother? The question was direct, almost brutal in its simplicity. Lucas had learned to expect it, learned to have an answer ready that was truthful without being too raw. She left when he was 2 weeks old, signed over her parental rights and moved to California. I haven't heard from her since. That must have been difficult. It was a relief, honestly. Lucas surprised himself with the admission. She didn't want to be a mother, resented the pregnancy, resented Noah, resented me for being happy about him. Better that she left than stayed and made all three of us miserable. Marianne was quiet for a moment, processing. You're doing this completely alone. I have Mrs. Chen. A babysitter you pay isn't the same as having support. It's what I can afford. Lucas heard the defensiveness creeping back into his voice and tried to soften it. I'm managing. We're okay. You're surviving, Marianne said for the third time. And barely. Lucas didn't have an argument left in him. The truth was too obvious, too visible in his shaking hands and hollow eyes, and the way he'd nearly broken down with gratitude at the simple offer of a car ride. They pulled into the parking lot of Maple Grove Apartments, and Lucas felt a familiar wash of shame at the sight of the aging complex with its cracked siding and flickering exterior lights. This was where his life had landed, a one-bedroom apartment in a building that had seen better days, where the heat was unreliable and the neighbors were loud and the rent still took 60% of his paycheck. Thank you for the ride, Lucas said, reaching for the door handle. I really appreciate it. Wait. Lucas paused, looking back at Marianne. She was staring straight ahead through the windshield, her expression unreadable. I have a house in Parkside, she said slowly, as if choosing each word with care. 20 minutes from the office. It's too big for one person, and I'm rarely there anyway. I work late most nights, usually don't get home until 10 or 11. Lucas's stomach twisted with sudden apprehension. Okay. There's a guest suite, separate entrance, full bathroom, small kitchenette. It's been empty for 3 years. The implication hung in the air between them, and Lucas felt his face flush hot despite the chill from his wet clothes. Ms. Cole, I'm not propositioning you, Hale. Marianne's voice was sharp enough to cut. I'm offering you a temporary solution to a practical problem. You're killing yourself with this commute, and your son is suffering for it. The guest suite would cut your travel time down to nothing, give you more time with him, more time to sleep, more time to actually live, instead of just survive. Lucas's mind raced, trying to process what she was suggesting. Live in his boss's house? In her guest suite? The whole thing felt surreal, dangerous, like stepping onto ice that looked solid but might crack at any moment. That's incredibly generous, he said carefully, but I can't accept that. Why not? Because Lucas struggled to articulate the tangle of concerns in his head. Because it's inappropriate. Because I work for you. Because I barely know you. Because accepting that kind of help feels like charity, and I don't. Everything is charity when you're drowning, Hale. Marianne finally turned to look at him, and her eyes were softer than he'd ever seen them. Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. Your son needs you healthy and present, and you can't be either of those things if you're spending 3 hours a day commuting in storms like this. I appreciate the offer, I really do, but think about it. Marianne cut him off before he could finish refusing. Don't answer now. Go home, get some sleep, and think about it. If you decide you're interested, we can discuss the details. If not, we never speak of it again. Lucas wanted to refuse outright, wanted to maintain the boundary between personal and professional, wanted to keep his struggles private and his dignity intact. But Noah stirred against his chest, making a small sound of discomfort, and Lucas looked down at his son's flushed, damp face. I'll think about it, he heard himself say. Marianne nodded, satisfied. Good. Now go inside before your son catches pneumonia. Lucas climbed out of the Mercedes, carefully shielding Noah from the rain. He hurried toward his building, fishing his keys from his pocket. At the entrance, he turned back to wave a thank you, but Marianne was already pulling away, the Mercedes' taillights disappearing into the storm. Inside the apartment, Lucas stripped Noah out of his wet clothes and changed him into warm pajamas. The baby was fully awake now, babbling happily despite the late hour. Lucas made him a bottle and settled into the worn armchair that served as their nursing station, holding Noah while he drank. The apartment was quiet except for Noah's contented suckling sounds and the rain pounding against the windows. Lucas looked around at the familiar space, the sagging couch he'd found on Craigslist, the coffee table scarred with water rings, the small kitchen with its ancient appliances. This was his home, his independence, proof that he could provide for his son on his own. But Marianne's words echoed in his tired mind. Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. Was it pride that made him want to refuse her offer, or was it fear? Fear of depending on someone, fear of owing someone, fear of what might happen if he let someone that close to the fragile life he'd built. Noah finished his bottle, and Lucas burped him gently, then carried him to the crib that took up half the bedroom. He laid his son down carefully, covering him with the soft blanket Mrs. Chen had knitted. Noah's eyes were already drifting closed, his small fist curled against his cheek. Lucas stood there watching him sleep, feeling the weight of every decision pressing down on his shoulders. He thought about the commute, the exhaustion, the way he was barely holding things together. He thought about Marianne's guest suite, the promise of more time, more rest, more life. He thought about how terrifying it was to need help. Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from Marianne's number. The offer has no strings attached, no expectations, no obligations. Just practical help from someone who recognizes when an employee is about to burn out. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. But know that the offer stands regardless of your answer. Lucas read the message 3 times, searching for hidden meanings, ulterior motives, anything that would justify his instinct to refuse. But the words were straightforward, almost clinical in their clarity. He should say no. Every rational part of his brain screamed that accepting would be a mistake, would blur lines that should stay sharp, would create a debt he couldn't repay. But standing there in the dim bedroom, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, Lucas felt something shift inside him. Maybe Marianne was right. Maybe pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Maybe sometimes survival meant accepting help, even when every instinct rebelled against it. He typed out a response before he could second-guess himself. Can we discuss the details tomorrow? The reply came almost instantly. My office. 9 a.m. Lucas put his phone away and sank down onto his own bed. not bothering to change out of his damp clothes. His mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow, to the conversation that would either change everything or confirm that he was right to be suspicious. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small apartment, everything was quiet. Noah slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of the decision his father was contemplating. And Lucas lay awake in the darkness, wondering if accepting help from Marianne Cole would save him or destroy the precarious balance he'd fought so hard to maintain. The rain hammered against the windows like it was trying to break through, and Lucas closed his eyes, exhausted beyond measure but unable to quiet his racing thoughts. Tomorrow would bring answers, for better or worse, but tonight there was only the storm and the silence and the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face everything alone. Lucas barely slept that night. He kept replaying the conversation with Marianne, analyzing every word, every pause, every inflection. By the time dawn broke gray and watery through his bedroom window, he'd convinced himself a dozen times to refuse her offer, then talked himself back into considering it just as many times. Noah woke at 6:30, his cheerful babbling cutting through Lucas's anxious thoughts. Lucas lifted his son from the crib, breathing in that sweet baby smell that always made the world feel slightly more manageable. "Big day today, buddy," Lucas murmured, carrying Noah to the kitchen. "Daddy's got a decision to make." Noah responded by grabbing Lucas's nose and giggling, blissfully unaware of the weight his father was carrying. Lucas made a bottle with one hand, balancing Noah on his hip with practiced ease. The apartment felt smaller than usual this morning, the walls pressing in with all their peeling paint and water stains that the landlord kept promising to fix. He fed Noah while mentally rehearsing what he'd say to Marianne. He needed to approach this conversation strategically, professionally. He'd ask about specific terms, boundaries, expectations. He'd make it clear that if he accepted, it would be temporary, just until he could save enough for a better apartment closer to work, maybe find a daycare with more flexible hours. The morning routine unfolded with mechanical precision. Lucas got himself ready while Noah played on a blanket on the floor, then dressed his son in a fresh outfit. Mrs. Chen didn't do morning care, so Lucas had worked out an arrangement with the daycare near the office. Expensive, but it meant Noah was close by in case of emergencies. The commute that morning felt eternal. The storm had passed, leaving behind flooding that turned streets into rivers and delayed every bus and train. Lucas stood pressed against strangers on the overcrowded train, Noah strapped to his chest in a carrier, and wondered how much longer he could sustain this existence. He dropped Noah at Little Sprouts daycare at 8:40, spending 10 minutes going over Noah's schedule with the staff, even though they knew it by heart. Then he practically ran the 3 blocks to Meridian Analytics, arriving at his desk with exactly 7 minutes to spare before his 9 o'clock meeting with Marianne. Lucas pulled up the Patterson analysis on his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Marianne had told him to turn in whatever he had, but his instinct was to polish it more, to make it perfect before presenting it. He forced himself to save the file as is and sent it to her email. The click of the send button felt like jumping off a cliff. At 8:58, he stood outside Marianne's office, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the glass wall, he could see her on the phone, her expression focused and intense. She noticed him waiting and held up one finger, 1 minute. Lucas used that minute to second-guess everything again. This was insane. You didn't move into your boss's house, no matter how practical the arrangement seemed. The power dynamic alone made it problematic. What if she used it against him later? What if accepting put his job at risk? What if... The door opened. Marianne stood there, perfectly composed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Lucas's monthly rent. "Come in, Hale." Her office was exactly what Lucas had expected. Minimalist, efficient, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, the surfaces clear of clutter. Even the small personal touches, a geometric sculpture on the desk, an abstract painting on one wall, felt calculated rather than warm. "Sit," Marianne said, gesturing to one of the chairs facing her desk. She settled into her own chair with fluid grace. "I read the Patterson analysis. Good work." Lucas blinked, surprised. "It's not finished." "It's thorough enough for me to move forward. I'll have Jenkins handle the final polish." Marianne folded her hands on the desk. "Which brings us to why you're here. Have you thought about my offer?" "I have." Lucas cleared his throat. I have some questions. I'd be concerned if you didn't. Lucas pulled out his phone, where he'd typed notes during his sleepless night. First, the practical things. You mentioned a guest suite with a separate entrance. Would Noah and I have complete privacy, our own space? Yes. The guest suite is in the east wing of the house. It has its own entrance from the driveway, so you wouldn't need to go through the main house at all. 2 rooms, full bathroom, kitchenette with a small fridge and microwave. About 600 square feet total. And you'd charge rent? Lucas needed to know this wasn't charity, needed some way to maintain his dignity in the arrangement. No. Marianne's answer was firm. The space is sitting empty. Having someone use it costs me nothing. That's not fair to you. Fair would be paying you enough that you don't need to work yourself to death just to afford basic housing. Marianne's expression hardened slightly. But company salary structures are complex, and changing them takes time. This is something I can do immediately. Lucas shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the admission that his salary wasn't sufficient. What about utilities, groceries, incidentals? Utilities are included. You'd be responsible for your own food and personal expenses, same as you are now. Marianne leaned back. Hale, I'm not trying to support you financially. I'm offering you space that's going unused anyway. Think of it as a company perk, if that makes it easier. Company perks don't usually involve living in your boss's house. True. A slight smile touched Marianne's lips, there and gone in an instant. But company perks also don't usually save employees from burnout that could result in costly turnover. I have a business interest in keeping good employees functional. It was the most pragmatic, least emotional way she could have framed it, and somehow that made Lucas feel better. This wasn't about pity or charity, it was about practical problem solving, which he could accept. What are the boundaries, he asked. Rules? Expectations? The guest suite is your private space. I won't enter it uninvited. You're not expected to socialize, have dinner together, or interact with me outside of work hours unless you choose to. The main house is off limits unless specifically invited. Marianne paused. I value my privacy, and I assume you value yours. This arrangement only works if we both respect that. What if it doesn't work out? What if one of us wants to end the arrangement? Then you give 2 weeks' notice, same as any rental situation, and we part ways with no hard feelings. Your job is completely separate from this arrangement. Accepting or refusing won't affect your position at the company, and choosing to leave later won't impact your employment. Lucas studied her face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. But Marianne's expression remained neutral, professional. She was presenting this exactly like a business transaction, which paradoxically made it feel safer. I have a son, Lucas said slowly, an 8-month-old baby. He cries at night sometimes. He's learning to crawl, which means noise during the day. He's not quiet or convenient. I'm aware. I've spent enough time around children to know they're not decorative objects. Marianne's tone softened fractionally. I'm offering you the space knowing full well that a baby comes with it. That's not a problem. And if he bothers you, if the noise is too much, then I'll tell you and we'll figure out a solution together like adults. Marianne leaned forward slightly. Hale, I'm not asking you to make your son invisible. I'm offering you a place to live. Children make noise. That's not a deal breaker. Lucas looked down at his phone, at the list of questions he'd prepared. He'd covered all the practical concerns, all the logistical details, but there was one question left, the one that got at the heart of his anxiety. Why? The word came out quieter than he'd intended. Why are you doing this? Marianne was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight Lucas hadn't heard before. 3 years ago, I had a senior analyst named David Chen. Brilliant man, dedicated worker, always the first one in and the last one out. He was supporting his elderly parents, putting his younger sister through medical school, and somehow still managing to exceed every expectation I set. She paused. One Tuesday morning, he collapsed at his desk. Massive heart attack. He was 36 years old. Lucas felt his chest tighten. David survived, Marianne continued, but he was never the same. Had to take disability leave, couldn't handle the stress anymore. I watched one of the best analysts I've ever employed burn himself out because he was too proud to ask for help, and I was too focused on results to notice the warning signs until it was too late. Her gray eyes met Lucas's directly. I don't want to watch that happen again. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way Lucas hadn't expected from Marianne Cole. He realized suddenly that this wasn't just about him. This was about her own guilt, her own need to do better. I'm not going to have a heart attack, Lucas said. No, you're just going to keep pushing until you make a mistake that gets you fired, or until exhaustion causes you to have an accident on that long commute, or until your body gives out in some other preventable way. Marianne's voice hardened. I'm offering you a chance to step back from the edge before you fall. Whether you take it is up to you. Lucas looked at his phone again, then set it face down on his lap. All his carefully prepared questions suddenly felt inadequate. This wasn't a business transaction, not really. This was one person recognizing another person's suffering and trying to alleviate it in the only way she knew how. If I say yes, Lucas said slowly, when could we make the move? This weekend. I'll have the suite cleaned and prepared. You can move in Sunday if that works for you. That fast? There a reason to wait? Lucas thought about his cramped apartment, the 3-hour daily commute, the way he felt like he was drowning every single day. No, he admitted. No reason to wait. Marianne nodded. Then it's settled. I'll text you the address and access codes tonight. Plan on Sunday afternoon. Just like that? Just like that. Marianne stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Now get back to work. The Donovan project needs your attention, and I want a preliminary assessment by Friday. Lucas stood as well, his legs feeling strangely unsteady. He'd just agreed to move into his boss's house. The reality of it was only beginning to sink in. Ms. Cole, he said as he reached the door, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Hale. Thank me when you've had a full night's sleep. Lucas returned to his desk in a daze. His coworkers moved around him with their usual Tuesday morning energy, completely unaware that Lucas's life had just taken a sharp turn into unfamiliar territory. He pulled up the Donovan project files, but the numbers swam before his eyes, meaningless. His phone buzzed. A text from Marianne's number with an address in Parkside, one of the nicest neighborhoods in the city, and a series of access codes. No message, just the practical information he'd need. Lucas stared at the address for a long moment, then opened a map app. The house was 2.3 miles from the office. He could walk it in 40 minutes, bike it in 15. Little Sprouts daycare was directly on the route. His entire commute would shrink from 3 hours to less than 1, giving him back 2 hours every single day. 2 hours with Noah. 2 hours to sleep or cook real meals, or maybe, impossibly, 2 hours to just exist without the constant pressure of rushing to the next thing. The next few days passed in a blur of logistics and second-guessing. Lucas gave notice at his apartment, losing his security deposit but feeling a guilty relief at leaving the place behind. He packed their belongings, a depressingly small collection of furniture and clothes that fit into the back of a borrowed truck in a single trip. On Saturday, Marcus from accounting helped him load everything up. Marcus had been friendly to Lucas since his first day, one of the few coworkers who'd bothered to learn Noah's name. So where's the new place? Marcus asked, hefting a box of kitchen supplies. Parkside, Lucas said, deliberately vague. Marcus whistled. Nice area. Rent must be insane there. I got a good deal. The lie tasted bitter, but Lucas wasn't ready to explain the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They finished loading by noon, and Marcus drove the truck while Lucas followed in his Honda with Noah secured in his car seat. The baby chattered happily the entire drive, delighted by the changing scenery. Marianne's house materialized as they turned onto Oakcrest Drive, and Lucas felt his stomach drop. The photos from the property listing he'd nervously Googled hadn't done it justice. It was a sprawling modern structure of glass and stone, set back from the street behind perfectly manicured landscaping. This wasn't just a nice house. This was wealth, real wealth, the kind Lucas had never been close to. Jesus, Marcus breathed, pulling the truck into the circular driveway. This is your place? The guest suite, Lucas corrected quickly. I'm renting the guest suite. Marcus gave him a look that said he wasn't buying the explanation but was too polite to push. They unloaded Lucas's meager belongings at the East Wing entrance, where Marianne had said the guest suite was located. The suite was bigger than Lucas's entire apartment had been. Hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lighting. The kitchenette had granite counters and stainless steel appliances. The bedroom was spacious enough for both Noah's crib and a queen-size bed, with a large window that looked out onto a garden Lucas hadn't even known was there. "Man," Marcus said, setting down the last box. "Some guest suite." Lucas paid Marcus with what little cash he had left and thanked him profusely. Once his friend had left, Lucas stood in the middle of the empty suite, Noah on his hip, and felt completely out of his depth. This was a mistake. He didn't belong here. People like him didn't live in places like this, didn't accept this kind of help from their bosses. He should call Marianne right now and tell her he'd changed his mind. Noah squirmed in his arms, reaching toward the window and the garden beyond. "Tree," he said clearly, a new word Lucas hadn't heard before. "Yeah, buddy," Lucas whispered. "Trees." And just like that, the doubt receded. This wasn't about him. This was about giving Noah a better life, a safer space, more time with his father. Lucas could swallow his pride for that. He spent the rest of Saturday unpacking and setting up. The suite came partially furnished, the bed, a small couch, a dining table, so Lucas's own furniture stayed in storage. By evening, the space was starting to feel almost livable. Noah's toys were scattered across the living area, his clothes were folded in the bedroom dresser, and Lucas had stocked the kitchenette with basic supplies. At 7 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. Lucas froze, his heart hammering. He'd been so focused on settling in that he'd almost forgotten this was Marianne's house, that she was somewhere on the other side of these walls. He opened the door to find her standing there, still dressed in work clothes despite it being Saturday evening. She looked tired, Lucas realized, the kind of bone-deep tired he recognized from his own reflection. "Just checking that you have everything you need," Marianne said. Her eyes flicked past him into the suite, taking in the organized chaos of moving day. "I can arrange for anything that's missing. We're fine," Lucas said. "Thank you. Everything's great." Marianne nodded, but she didn't leave. She seemed to be searching for words, which was so unlike her usual decisive manner that Lucas felt his anxiety spike. "There's no schedule," she said finally. "No expectations about when you come and go. You're not a guest here, Hale. This is your home now, at least temporarily. Live your life normally." "I will, thank you. And if you need anything, if the heat isn't working or you can't figure out the security system or whatever, my number is programmed into the intercom system. Don't hesitate to call." "I appreciate that." Another pause. Marianne shifted her weight slightly, and Lucas realized she was uncomfortable. The great Marianne Cole, who commanded boardrooms and intimidated executives, was uncomfortable with this simple human interaction. "I should let you finish settling in," she said. "Miss Cole?" Lucas called as she turned to leave. She looked back at him, one eyebrow raised in question. "I meant what I said earlier. Thank you. This means more than I can express." Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Get some sleep, Hale. You look like you haven't had a decent night's rest in months." "That's because I haven't." "Well, now you can." She gestured toward the quiet, spacious suite. "No 3-hour commute tomorrow, no noisy neighbors. Just sleep." After she left, Lucas stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the closed door that separated his space from the main house. This was really happening. He was living in Marianne Cole's house, accepting help he'd sworn he'd never need. The shame tried to rise up again, but Lucas pushed it down. He thought of Noah, thought of the extra hours they'd have together now, thought of the possibility of actually sleeping for more than 4 hours in a row. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was just practical problem-solving, like Marianne had said. Lucas closed and locked the door, then returned to where Noah was playing on a blanket on the floor. His son looked up at him with that guileless smile that made everything worth it. "What do you think, buddy?" Lucas asked, sinking down onto the floor beside him. "Think we can make this work?" Noah responded by crawling onto Lucas's lap and demanding a story. Lucas obliged, pulling out their favorite board book about farm animals. As he read about cows and pigs and chickens, his voice automatically falling into the animated rhythm Noah loved, Lucas felt something unfamiliar loosening in his chest. For the first time in 8 months, he felt like he might actually be able to breathe. That night, after Noah was asleep in his crib, Lucas lay in the comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Not the tense, fragile quiet of his old apartment where any noise felt like an intrusion, but a peaceful quiet that felt almost luxurious. No sirens, no shouting neighbors, no pipes clanking in the walls. Lucas closed his eyes and, for the first time in longer than he could remember, fell asleep without the weight of tomorrow's commute pressing down on his chest. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Noah's happy babbling from the crib. Lucas checked his phone, 8:47 a.m. He'd slept for 9 hours straight. 9 hours. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. His body felt different as he got out of bed. Still tired, months of exhaustion didn't disappear in one night, but somehow more solid, more present. He scooped Noah out of the crib and pressed a kiss to his son's head. "Morning, buddy. Ready for our first real day here?" The morning routine was transformed by proximity. Lucas fed Noah breakfast, got them both dressed, and was standing outside Little Sprout's daycare by 9:15. The entire process that used to take 2.5 hours had taken 45 minutes. At the office, Lucas felt almost disoriented by arriving at a reasonable hour. His coworkers were still getting settled, coffee cups in hand, Monday morning conversations happening in small clusters. Lucas had never been part of this world, the world of people who arrived at normal times, who had the energy to socialize before diving into work. "Hail." He turned to find Mary Ann standing by his desk, a folder in her hands. "My office," she said. "We need to discuss the Donovan assessment." Lucas followed her, very aware of the curious glances from his coworkers. He'd never been summoned to Mary Ann's office this frequently before. People were going to start talking. But once inside, Mary Ann's manner was purely professional. She spread out the preliminary assessment Lucas had submitted Friday, pointing to specific sections and asking targeted questions. They discussed revenue projections, market positioning, potential risks. It was exactly like any other work meeting, and Lucas felt himself relaxing into the familiar territory of analysis and strategy. "Good work," Mary Ann said when they'd finished. "I want the full report by end of day Wednesday." "I can have it to you by Tuesday." "Wednesday is fine. Don't push yourself unnecessarily." Lucas nodded and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "The suite is perfect. Thank you again." How did Noah sleep? The question surprised him. "Great. Better than he has in weeks, actually." "Good." Mary Ann returned her attention to her computer screen. "That's what matters." Back at his desk, Lucas dove into the Donovan report with energy he hadn't felt in months. The numbers made sense. His analysis flowed, and by lunch he'd made more progress than he'd expected to complete all day. He picked up Noah at 5:30 and walked home in the late afternoon sun, his son giggling in the stroller. The walk took 20 minutes, and Lucas realized he was enjoying it. The fresh air, the quiet neighborhood streets, the chance to decompress between work and home. At the suite, he made dinner while Noah played nearby. Real dinner, not microwaved leftovers or takeout he couldn't afford. Chicken and vegetables that he'd actually had time to shop for and prepare. They ate together at the small table, Noah making an enthusiastic mess of his mashed sweet potatoes. After bath time and stories, Lucas tucked Noah into bed and stood watching his son drift off to sleep. The evening had been calm, unhurried, present in a way their evenings had never been before. No rushing, no exhaustion making Lucas snap over small things, no desperate calculations about whether he had the energy for one more task. This was what having margin in life felt like. This was what he'd been missing. Lucas was cleaning up the dinner dishes when his phone rang. Mary Ann's name appeared on the screen, and his stomach clenched with immediate anxiety. Had something gone wrong already? "Hello?" "I'm ordering Thai food," Mary Ann said without preamble. "Would you and Noah like anything?" Lucas blinked, completely thrown. We already ate, but thank you." "Right, of course." A pause. "How was the first day?" "Good, really good, actually." Lucas leaned against the counter. "The commute made a huge difference." "I thought it might." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm glad it's working out." The conversation felt stilted, awkward, like neither of them quite knew how to navigate this new dynamic. But there was something almost touching about Mary Ann's attempt to reach out, to make sure he was settling in okay. "Ms. Cole," Lucas said, "we're fine. You don't need to check on us. I promise I'll reach out if we need anything." "I know." She sounded almost embarrassed. I just wanted to make sure the transition was smooth. It is. Thank you. After they hung up, Lucas stood in his quiet kitchen and smiled. Marianne Cole, terrifying, brilliant, intimidating Marianne Cole, was worried about whether he had enough Thai food. Maybe this arrangement was going to work out after all. The next 3 weeks unfolded with a rhythm Lucas hadn't known was possible. He woke each morning without the dread of a brutal commute hanging over him. He walked Noah to daycare through tree-lined streets where the biggest challenge was avoiding squirrels, not navigating overcrowded trains. He worked with a clarity he'd forgotten he was capable of, his mind no longer clouded by chronic exhaustion. And in the evenings, he had time, actual time, to be present with his son. But the ease of the new arrangement brought its own complications. Living in Marianne's house meant occupying a space that blurred every professional boundary Lucas had carefully maintained. He saw her car in the driveway when he came home. He heard the faint sound of her heels on hardwood when she arrived late at night. Sometimes he'd glimpse her through a window, passing through the main house with that same focused intensity she brought to everything. They maintained a careful distance at work. Marianne treated him exactly as she had before, professionally, with high expectations and zero tolerance for mediocrity. Their meetings focused purely on projects and deadlines. She never referenced the living arrangement, never asked how he was settling in beyond that first awkward phone call. It should have been a relief. Instead, Lucas found himself hyper-aware of her in ways that made him uncomfortable. He noticed when she looked tired, when tension tightened the corners of her mouth, when she rubbed her temples in that particular way that meant a headache was building. He noticed because he lived in her space now, because some part of him felt obligated to pay attention, to watch for signs that this arrangement was becoming a burden. On a Thursday evening in his 4th week there, Lucas was giving Noah a bath when he heard shouting from the main house. The words were muffled by walls and distance, but the anger was unmistakable. Lucas paused, Noah's rubber duck frozen in his hand, listening. A door slammed. Silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. Lucas continued the bath, trying to ignore the knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't his business. Marianne's personal life had nothing to do with him. But 20 minutes later, after Noah was in pajamas and contentedly chewing on a teething ring, Lucas found himself standing at his door debating. The main house was dark except for a light in what he'd learned was Marianne's home office. Through the window, he could see her silhouette, motionless at her desk. He shouldn't go over there. It would be crossing a line, inserting himself where he wasn't wanted. But the memory of her checking on him that first night, awkwardly offering Thai food, made him grab his phone before he could second guess. Lucas texted her number. I heard shouting earlier. Are you okay? The response came after several minutes. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Lucas stared at the message, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. He should leave it alone. Instead, he typed, I'm making coffee. Would you like some? This time the pause was longer. Lucas was about to put his phone away when it buzzed. I'll come to you, 5 minutes. Lucas spent those 5 minutes in a minor panic, suddenly aware of Noah's toys scattered across the floor, the dishes still in the sink, the laundry he'd been folding on the couch. He did a frantic speed clean, shoving toys into a basket and dumping dishes in the dishwasher. By the time Marianne knocked, the suite looked marginally presentable. She stood in his doorway wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe style. Lucas had never seen her like this, casual, unarmored, and the sight threw him off balance. Come in, he managed. Marianne stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding Noah on his playmat. The baby looked up at her and smiled, reaching out with both hands in the universal gesture of wanting to be picked up. May I? Marianne asked. Of course. She lifted Noah with surprising confidence, settling him on her hip like she'd done it 1,000 times. Noah immediately grabbed a fistful of her sweater and babbled something that sounded important. Is that right? Marianne said seriously. That does sound concerning. Lucas found himself smiling despite the tension. He's very opinionated. I can tell. Marianne sat on the couch, Noah still in her arms. You said something about coffee. Lucas retreated to the kitchenette, grateful for something to do with his hands. He could feel Marianne watching him as he prepared 2 cups, her presence filling the small space in a way that felt both intrusive and oddly natural. Black? He asked. Please. Lucas handed her a mug and settled into the armchair across from her, cradling his own coffee. Noah had discovered Marianne's hair and was attempting to eat it, his small fingers tangled in the dark strands. Sorry, Lucas said. He's in an oral exploration phase. Everything goes in the mouth. It's fine. Marianne gently extracted her hair from Noah's grip, offering him her finger instead. He latched on immediately, gnawing contentedly. My sister has 3 kids. I'm familiar with the territory. It was the first personal detail Marianne had ever shared with him. Lucas filed it away, curious but not wanting to push. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds Noah's happy gurgling and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Marianne's shoulders were tight with tension, her jaw clenched even as she maintained her composure. You don't have to talk about it, Lucas said quietly. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Marianne looked down at Noah, stroking his soft hair with her free hand. My ex-husband, she said finally. He stops by occasionally to remind me what a failure I am at human relationships. The bitterness in her voice was so unlike her usual controlled tone that Lucas felt something crack in his chest. I'm sorry. Don't be. He's not wrong. Marianne's laugh was sharp and humorless. I work 80 hours a week. I have no social life beyond business dinners. I've been divorced for 3 years and haven't been on a single date because the idea of trying to connect with someone feels exhausting. She looked up at Lucas. He came by to inform me that he's getting remarried, to a woman who apparently knows how to prioritize personal relationships over spreadsheets. Lucas wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the self-recrimination he heard beneath her words. But platitudes felt insulting, so he went with honesty instead. For what it's worth, your spreadsheets are excellent. Marianne stared at him for a beat, then laughed. A real laugh this time, surprised and genuine. Thank you, Hale, that's exactly the validation I needed. I'm serious. You're brilliant at what you do. If your ex-husband can't appreciate that, he's an idiot. Oh, he appreciates it. He just doesn't want to live with it. Marianne shifted Noah to her other arm, the baby now drowsy against her shoulder. Do you know why we got divorced? Lucas shook his head. He wanted children. I didn't. Simple as that. She ran her hand gently along Noah's back. I'm good with kids. I like them, actually. But I knew I couldn't be the kind of parent they deserved. Too focused on work, too driven, too... She paused, searching for the word. Absent, even when I'm physically present. That's not true, Lucas said. You noticed I was struggling before I even admitted it to myself. You offered me help when you had no obligation to do so. You remembered Noah's age, asked about his sleep. That's not absent, that's paying attention. To an employee, in a professional context. Marianne's voice was gentle but firm. That's different from being responsible for another human being 24 hours a day, from putting their needs before your own ambitions consistently, year after year. She looked at Lucas directly. You do that. You're exhausted and struggling, but you show up for him every single day. That's what good parenting looks like. I know myself well enough to know I couldn't sustain it. Lucas thought about all the times he'd felt like he was failing Noah, all the moments of frustration and exhaustion when he'd wondered if his son deserved better. Hearing Marianne describe his daily survival as good parenting felt surreal. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water, he admitted. Maybe, but you're still swimming. Marianne stood carefully, Noah now fully asleep against her shoulder. Where should I put him? Lucas led her to the bedroom, pulling back the blanket in Noah's crib. Marianne laid him down with practiced gentleness, her hand lingering on his back for a moment before she stepped away. They returned to the living room, and this time Marianne sat with more ease, tucking her legs underneath her on the couch. The formal boss had receded, replaced by something more human, more accessible. Can I ask you something? Lucas said. You just made me coffee and listened to me complain about my ex-husband. I think we're past formalities. Why analytics? What made you choose this field? Marianne considered the question, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. Control, she said finally. Numbers make sense. They follow rules. If you understand the patterns, you can predict outcomes. People are messy and unpredictable, but data, she smiled slightly, data doesn't lie. It doesn't change its mind or want things you can't give it. That sounds lonely. It is. Marianne's honesty was stark. But it's also safe. I'm good at my job. I'm good at analyzing trends and building models and making strategic decisions. I'm not good at the other stuff, the emotional labor, the vulnerability, the constant negotiation that relationships require. You're good at it right now, Lucas pointed out. We're having an actual conversation. You're being vulnerable. Because there's a structure to this. You work for me, you live in my house temporarily, and eventually you'll move on. The boundaries are clear. There's an endpoint. Marianne set down her mug. That makes it manageable. Lucas felt something twist in his chest at the idea of this arrangement having an endpoint, though he couldn't quite name why. This was temporary. They'd both been clear about that. But sitting here with Marianne, seeing her without the armor of her professional persona, made him wonder what it would be like if it wasn't. My ex-wife said something similar, Lucas found himself saying. That I was too much. Too intense about wanting to be a father. Too focused on building a family instead of enjoying our freedom. She said I was trying to create something that didn't exist, this fantasy of domestic happiness that was just going to trap us both. But you went ahead and had Noah anyway. She got pregnant by accident. I was thrilled. She was horrified. Lucas's throat tightened with the memory. For those 9 months, I kept hoping she'd come around. That when she held him for the first time, maternal instinct would kick in and she'd want to be his mother. Instead, she looked at him for about 30 seconds and asked when I was going to take him away. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was honest about who she was. I can respect that, even if it hurt. Lucas met Marianne's eyes. But it does make me wonder sometimes if I'm setting Noah up for disappointment. If my determination to be a good father is just my own need, not what's actually best for him. You're giving him stability and love. That's not selfish, it's exactly what he needs. Marianne leaned forward slightly. Your ex-wife wasn't wrong for knowing her limitations. But you're not wrong for wanting something different. Those are just different choices, different ways of being honest with yourself. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing from parenting to careers to the small absurdities of daily life. Lucas learned that Marianne played piano badly but enthusiastically, that she'd grown up in rural Montana on a ranch, that she'd put herself through business school while working 3 jobs. She learned that Lucas had wanted to be a marine biologist before student loans pushed him toward more practical pursuits, that he was secretly addicted to terrible reality television, that his mother had died when he was 20 and his father had remarried and moved to Arizona without looking back. By the time Marianne stood to leave, something had shifted between them. The careful professional distance had been breached, replaced by something Lucas couldn't quite define. Not friendship exactly, there was still too much power imbalance for that, but connection, maybe. Understanding. Thank you for the coffee, Marianne said at the door. And for listening. Anytime. Lucas meant it. She studied his face for a moment, her expression unreadable. You're a good man, Hale. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. After she left, Lucas cleaned up the coffee mugs and checked on Noah, who was sleeping peacefully. He should feel relieved that the evening had gone well, that the awkward conversation had actually brought them closer. Instead, he felt unsettled, like he'd opened a door he couldn't close now. The next morning at work, Marianne was back to her usual self, controlled, professional, exacting. She called Lucas into her office to discuss a new project, her tone crisp and businesslike. If their conversation the night before had affected her, she showed no sign of it. But when the meeting ended and Lucas stood to leave, she said quietly, I appreciated last night. Thank you. Me too, Lucas said. Over the following week, small things began to change. Marianne started timing her arrivals home to occasionally overlap with Noah's bedtime, stopping by the suite to say goodnight to the baby. Lucas would find groceries he hadn't ordered in his kitchenette, good coffee, fresh bread, the organic baby food Noah liked. Once he came home to discover that someone had fixed the loose handle on Noah's crib that had been bothering him for weeks. They started having coffee together on weekend mornings, usually in Lucas's suite, but occasionally in the main house's kitchen. The conversations ranged from mundane to profound, touching on everything from market trends to childhood memories. Lucas found himself looking forward to these moments, to the way Marianne's carefully constructed walls came down when it was just the two of them and Noah. One Saturday morning, Marianne showed up at his door with a pack and play. "I thought you might want to use the garden sometimes," she said, slightly awkward. "This way Noah can play outside while you relax." Lucas took the pack and play, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "You didn't have to do this." "I know. I wanted to." Marianne met his eyes. "You've been cooped up in the suite for weeks. The garden is beautiful this time of year. You should enjoy it." That afternoon, Lucas set up the pack and play under a large oak tree in the garden. Noah was ecstatic, crawling around the mesh enclosure and grabbing at grass and leaves. Lucas sat nearby with a book, soaking in the sunshine and peace. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice Marianne until she was standing right beside him, 2 glasses of lemonade in her hands. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Please." She settled onto the grass beside him with surprising ease, her casual jeans and t-shirt so different from her work armor. Noah saw her and immediately demanded attention, pulling himself up on the side of the pack and play and bouncing with excitement. "Someone's happy to see you," Lucas observed. "The feeling's mutual." Marianne reached over to tickle Noah's belly, earning delighted giggles. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Noah play. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, dappling the grass with patterns of light and shadow. Lucas felt something in his chest loosen, a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "Can I ask you something?" Marianne said eventually. "Of course." "Why did you become an analyst? You mentioned wanting to be a marine biologist. What changed?" Lucas considered the question. "Student loans, mostly. I graduated with $60,000 in debt and no job prospects in marine biology that would let me pay it off. My roommate's dad worked at a consulting firm and said they were hiring. I figured I'd do it for a few years, pay down the debt, then figure out what I really wanted." He smiled ruefully. "That was 10 years ago. Do you regret it?" "Sometimes. I see documentaries about coral reefs or deep-sea exploration, and I remember how excited I used to get about that stuff." Lucas shrugged. "But then I think about Noah, about being able to provide for him, and the regret fades. Maybe I'm not studying ocean ecosystems, but I'm building a life. That matters too." "You could go back to it," Marianne said. "Eventually, there are marine biology programs that accept mid-career professionals. With what time? What money?" Lucas shook his head. "That ship sailed, Marianne. I'm at peace with it." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and they both noticed. Marianne's eyes widened slightly, and Lucas felt heat creep up his neck. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't—" "It's fine." Marianne's voice was soft. "We're not at work. You can call me Marianne." The permission felt significant, like crossing another invisible line. Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Noah chose that moment to lose his balance and sit down hard, his face crumpling in preparation for tears. Both Lucas and Marianne moved simultaneously, but Lucas was closer and scooped his son up first. "You're okay, buddy," Lucas soothed, bouncing Noah gently. "Just a little tumble." Marianne watched them with an expression Lucas couldn't quite read. When Noah had calmed and was happily chewing on his father's shirt collar, she said, "You're really good with him. Natural." "I don't feel natural most of the time. I feel like I'm making it up as I go." "That's what all parents feel like. The difference is, you're willing to keep trying even when it's hard." Marianne paused. "My ex-husband wanted me to quit my job when we had kids, said someone needed to be present full-time, and it obviously wasn't going to be him." "That's not fair." "No, but it's honest. He knew himself well enough to know he wouldn't be a hands-on father. And I knew myself well enough to know I couldn't be a stay-at-home mother without resenting everyone involved." Marianne looked at Noah, who was now dozing against Lucas's shoulder. "Watching you with him makes me wonder sometimes if I made the right choice." "You did," Lucas said firmly. "Not everyone is meant to be a parent. There's no shame in knowing that about yourself." "Except I look at moments like this." She gestured to the garden, to Lucas and Noah, to the peaceful afternoon. "And I wonder what I'm missing." Lucas felt the weight of her vulnerability, the trust it took to admit that doubt. "Can I tell you something my mother told me before she died?" Marianne nodded. "She said that life is just a series of choices, and every choice means closing a door on other possibilities. The key is making choices that align with who you actually are, not who you think you should be. You chose your career over motherhood because that aligned with who you are. That's not failure. That's self-awareness. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Lucas's throat tightened. I wish Noah could have known her. Tell him about her, Marianne said. When he's older, keep her memory alive through stories. They stayed in the garden until early evening, talking and playing with Noah. At one point, Marianne disappeared into the house and returned with a blanket and snacks, transforming their impromptu afternoon into something almost like a picnic. Lucas couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this relaxed, this present. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Noah fell asleep in Lucas's arms. Marianne helped him pack up the pack and play and carry everything back to the suite. Thank you for today, Lucas said at his door. It was perfect. We should do it again, Marianne said. Next weekend, maybe. I'd like that. She smiled, and Lucas noticed how different she looked when she smiled. Younger, softer, more open. Then she turned and walked back toward the main house, and Lucas stood watching her go, Noah warm and solid in his arms. That night, after Noah was in bed, Lucas sat on his couch and acknowledged what he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. He was developing feelings for Marianne Cole, not just gratitude for her help, not just appreciation for her intelligence and competence. Real feelings, the kind that made his stomach flip when she smiled, that made him hyper-aware of her presence, that made him look forward to their morning coffee conversations with an intensity that went beyond friendly. It was a disaster waiting to happen. She was his boss. This living arrangement was temporary. The power dynamic alone made any kind of romantic relationship impossible. And yet, sitting there in the quiet suite she'd given him, remembering the way she'd looked at Noah with such tenderness, Lucas couldn't quite make the feelings go away. He went to bed that night knowing he was in trouble, but unable to regret the connection they'd built. Whatever happened next, at least he'd had this, these weeks of peace and conversation and unexpected friendship. That had to count for something. The realization that he had feelings for Marianne sat like a stone in Lucas's chest through the following week. He tried to maintain the careful distance they'd established at work, but found himself hyper-conscious of every interaction. When she called him into her office to discuss the quarterly projections, he noticed the way afternoon light caught the silver at her temples. When she handed him a file, their fingers brushed, and he felt it like electricity. It was becoming harder to separate Marianne, his boss, from Marianne, the woman who played with his son in the garden, who listened to his fears at midnight, who'd given him a home when he'd been drowning. He was so distracted that he nearly missed the email that came through on Wednesday afternoon. The subject line made his stomach drop. Building reassignment notice, Maple Grove Apartments. Lucas opened it with dread he couldn't quite explain. The property management company informed him that, due to building renovations, his former apartment would be uninhabitable for the next 6 months. Since he'd already vacated, this didn't affect him directly, but they wanted to notify all former tenants that returning before the renovation completion date would not be possible. 6 months. The temporary arrangement he'd made with Marianne had been vaguely defined as a few months at most, but 6 months pushed it into different territory, more permanent, more entangled, more dangerous given his growing feelings. Lucas stared at the email for a long time before forwarding it to Marianne with a simple message. We should discuss the timeline. Let me know when you're available. Her response came within minutes. My office, 4 p.m. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. Lucas tried to focus on the revenue analysis he was supposed to be completing, but the numbers kept blurring together. He was going to have to tell Marianne he needed to find somewhere else to live, needed to extract himself from the situation before his feelings became more complicated. It was the smart thing to do, the professional thing. Never mind that the thought of leaving made his chest ache. At 4 o'clock precisely, Lucas knocked on Marianne's office door. She looked up from her computer, her expression unreadable. Come in. Close the door. Lucas obeyed, his heart hammering. Marianne gestured to the chair across from her desk, and he sat, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. I saw your email, she said. Your old building is uninhabitable for 6 months. Yes, which means I need to start looking for a new place. Lucas forced the words out. I can't impose on your hospitality for that long. Why not? The question caught him off guard. Because it's too long. Because this was supposed to be temporary. Because he struggled to articulate the real reason without revealing too much. Because I don't want to overstay my welcome. Marianne leaned back in her chair, studying him with that analytical gaze he both loved and feared. You haven't overstayed anything, Hale. The suite is still sitting empty except for you and Noah. Having you there costs me nothing and benefits you considerably. What's the actual problem? Lucas felt trapped by the directness of her question. He couldn't tell her the truth, that living in her house while developing feelings for her felt like slowly losing his mind, that every casual conversation felt loaded with meaning he had no right to read into it, that he was terrified of doing something stupid that would ruin both his job and the friendship they'd built. It just feels like too much, he said finally, like I'm taking advantage. You're not. Marianne's voice softened slightly. Lucas, look at me. He did, and the use of his first name made something flutter in his chest. I offered you the suite because you needed it and I had the space. That hasn't changed. If anything, you've made the house feel less empty. I hear Noah laughing in the garden and it makes me smile. I look forward to our weekend coffee conversations. You're not a burden. You're... She paused, seeming to search for the right word. Pleasant company. Lucas didn't know what to do with that admission. Pleasant company felt like such an inadequate description for what they'd become to each other, but maybe that was safer. Maybe keeping it casual and understated was the only way this could work. I don't want you to feel obligated, he said. I don't do things out of obligation. You should know that by now. Marianne's lips curved into a slight smile. If I wanted you gone, I'd tell you. I'm not known for my subtlety. Despite himself, Lucas laughed. No, you're really not. So we're agreed? You'll stay until you find something better? No artificial timeline? Lucas knew he should argue, should insist on setting boundaries and maintaining distance. Instead, he heard himself say, if you're sure. I am. They looked at each other for a moment longer than was strictly professional, and Lucas felt the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them. Then Marianne's phone rang, shattering the moment, and Lucas stood to leave. Hale, she called as he reached the door. He turned back. I mean it. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Thank you, Marianne. That evening, Lucas picked up Noah from daycare and walked home through the autumn twilight, his mind still churning. The conversation with Marianne had resolved the practical problem, but done nothing to address the emotional complication. If anything, her insistence that he stay had made it worse. How was he supposed to get over these feelings when she kept being kind to him, kept letting him deeper into her life? At the suite, he found a note slipped under his door in Marianne's precise handwriting. I'm making dinner tonight. Join me in the main house at 7 if you'd like. No pressure. Lucas stood holding the note, debating. The smart thing would be to decline, to maintain some separation. But Noah needed to eat, and Lucas was tired of his own cooking, and some traitorous part of him desperately wanted to spend the evening with Marianne. At 7 o'clock, he knocked on the main house door. Noah balanced on his hip. Marianne answered, wearing jeans and an old college sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked younger like this, more relaxed, and Lucas felt his careful resolve crumbling. Come in, she said, stepping aside. I hope you like pasta. It's one of the few things I can cook without burning down the kitchen. The main house was beautiful in an austere way. Clean lines, minimal furniture, everything in shades of gray and white. But Marianne had made an effort tonight. Candles flickered on the dining table, soft music played from hidden speakers, and the kitchen smelled amazing. This is incredible, Lucas said. Don't be too impressed. The sauce came from a jar. Marianne took Noah from him, settling the baby on her hip with practiced ease. But I did boil the water myself, so there's that. Lucas laughed and followed her to the kitchen. Marianne had set out a high chair. Where had that come from? And she placed Noah in it while Lucas helped her finish preparing dinner. They worked together with surprising coordination, Lucas draining pasta while Marianne tossed salad, their movements synchronized like they'd done this 100 times before. Over dinner, Noah entertained them by smashing pasta into his face with gleeful enthusiasm. Marianne watched him with undisguised amusement, occasionally wiping sauce off his nose. He's going to need a bath after this, Lucas observed. Probably 3 baths. Marianne offered Noah a small piece of garlic bread, which he immediately tried to wear as a hat. But he's having fun, so it's worth it. They talked easily through the meal, the conversation flowing from work gossip to childhood memories to plans for the weekend. Lucas found himself relaxing despite his earlier resolution to maintain distance. This felt too good, too natural, too much like something he could get used to. After dinner, Lucas started to clean up, but Marianne waved him off. "Leave it. I'll handle it later. Let's take Noah to the living room before he falls asleep in his pasta." The living room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Marianne had laid out a soft blanket on the floor, along with some of Noah's toys that Lucas recognized from the suite. "You brought his toys over?" Lucas asked. "I might have raided your place while you were at work." Marianne looked slightly embarrassed. "I thought he'd be more comfortable with familiar things." The thoughtfulness of it made Lucas's throat tight. He sat on the floor beside Noah, who immediately crawled into his lap and demanded a story. Lucas obliged, pulling out the board book Marianne must have brought over, and began reading about a caterpillar's quest to find lunch. Marianne settled onto the couch above them, watching with an expression Lucas couldn't quite decipher. He was acutely aware of her presence, of how domestic this whole scene felt, like they were a family instead of a boss and employee engaged in a temporary living arrangement. Halfway through the second reading, Noah always demanded multiple iterations, Marianne's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression darkened. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into the hallway. Lucas couldn't hear the conversation, but he heard the tone, sharp, defensive, angry. When Marianne returned 10 minutes later, her carefully constructed calm had cracks in it. "Everything okay?" Lucas asked. "My ex-husband." Marianne sat heavily on the couch. "He's getting married next month and wanted to make sure I knew, as if the first 3 times he mentioned it weren't enough." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I don't even know why I let it bother me. I don't want him back. I'm happy he's moving on. But something about it feels like—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Like proof that you made the wrong choice?" Lucas offered quietly. Marianne looked at him sharply, then her expression softened. "Yeah, exactly that." Noah, sensing the tension, abandoned his book and crawled toward Marianne with determination. He pulled himself up using the couch cushion, then reached for her with both arms. Marianne lifted him into her lap automatically, and Noah immediately snuggled against her chest with a contented sigh. "See," Lucas said, "you're good at this. Being a human pillow, being present, being gentle, being exactly what someone needs in the moment." Lucas stood and joined them on the couch, sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Your ex-husband is an idiot if he doesn't see that." Marianne looked down at Noah, who was already drowsy, his small hand fisted in her sweatshirt. "He used to say I was too cold, too focused on work to notice the people around me. Maybe he was right. You noticed me." The words came out before Lucas could stop them. "You saw I was struggling when no one else did. You offered help when you had no obligation to do so. You've made space in your life for me and Noah, and you've done it with more grace and kindness than I had any right to expect. That's not cold, Marianne. That's the opposite of cold." She met his eyes, and Lucas saw something vulnerable there, something raw and uncertain. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just playing house. If this—" She gestured to encompass the 3 of them, the domestic scene they'd created. "Is just me pretending I can be something I'm not." "You're not pretending anything. You're just being yourself." Lucas reached over and gently took one of her hands. "And yourself is pretty remarkable." The moment stretched between them, loaded with possibility. Marianne's hand was warm in his, her thumb unconsciously stroking against his palm. Noah dozed between them, his breathing soft and even. Lucas knew he should pull away, should remember all the reasons this was a bad idea. But he couldn't quite make himself let go. "Lucas?" Marianne said softly, and the sound of his name in her voice made his heart stutter. "I need to tell you something." Before she could continue, Noah woke with a sharp cry. His face crumpled, and he reached for Lucas with desperate hands. Lucas took him automatically, feeling the heat radiating from his son's small body. "He's burning up," Lucas said, alarm spiking through him. He pressed his lips to Noah's forehead. "He's got a fever." Marianne was on her feet instantly. "How high?" I don't know. I need to get him back to the suite. Get the thermometer. I have one in my bathroom. Stay here. She disappeared and returned moments later with a digital thermometer. Lucas took Noah's temperature while Marianne hovered anxiously nearby. The numbers climbed: 101, 102, 102.5. That's high, Lucas said, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. That's too high. It's a fever, but it's not dangerous yet. Marianne's voice was calm, grounding. Does he have any other symptoms? Lucas did a quick assessment. Noah was crying, but not inconsolable, fussy, but not lethargic. I don't think so. Maybe just teething? He's been drooling a lot. Give him infant acetaminophen and monitor him. If it goes above 103, we'll take him to urgent care. Lucas nodded, grateful for her calm authority in the midst of his fear. He'd been through fevers with Noah before, but it never got easier. The sight of his son in distress always triggered that primal parental terror that something was seriously wrong. I should get him back to the suite, Lucas said, standing with Noah in his arms. Or you could stay here. Marianne gestured toward the hallway. The guest room is made up. It's closer to my bathroom, and I have a better thermometer, and… She stopped herself. I just think you shouldn't be alone with this. Lucas wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain that last boundary. But Noah let out another unhappy cry, and Lucas's resolve shattered. Okay, he said. Thank you. Marianne led him to the guest room, a spacious bedroom with its own bathroom and a king-sized bed. She brought pillows to create a barrier so Noah couldn't roll off, then disappeared and returned with the medicine, a cool washcloth, and a basin of water. I'll be in my room if you need anything, she said. Don't hesitate to wake me. Marianne. Lucas caught her hand as she turned to leave. Thank you. For all of this. She squeezed his hand gently. That's what friends do. After she left, Lucas gave Noah the medicine and settled them both on the bed. He stripped Noah down to his diaper to help him cool down, then held him close, singing softly. Noah's cries gradually subsided into whimpers, then into fitful sleep. Lucas checked his temperature every 30 minutes, watching the numbers slowly decline as the medicine took effect. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on the door. Marianne entered carrying 2 mugs of tea, still dressed in her sweatshirt and jeans. How is he? She whispered. Fever's down to 100.8. I think the worst has passed. Lucas accepted the tea gratefully. You didn't have to stay up. I know. Marianne settled into the armchair near the bed, tucking her legs underneath her. But I wanted to make sure you were both okay. They sat in companionable silence, watching Noah sleep. The baby's face was flushed but peaceful, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Lucas felt exhaustion pulling at him, but he was too wired to sleep. You're a good father, Marianne said quietly. The way you responded to his fever, calm, competent, focused on what he needed, that's not something you can learn. It's just who you are. I was terrified, Lucas admitted. I'm always terrified something will happen to him. That's love. It's supposed to be terrifying. Marianne set down her mug. Can I ask you something? Anything. Earlier, before Noah got sick, I was about to tell you something. Do you want to know what it was? Lucas's heart started pounding. Yes. Marianne looked at him for a long moment, her expression vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. I was going to tell you that I'm glad you're here, not just because of the practical arrangement, but because… She paused, seeming to gather courage. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about helping an employee and became about wanting you in my life. You and Noah both. Lucas felt like all the air had left the room. Marianne, I know it's complicated, she continued quickly. I know I'm your boss, and this situation has power dynamics that make anything beyond friendship problematic. But I wanted you to know that what I feel for you isn't just professional concern. It's more than that. It's been more than that for a while now. Lucas set his tea down carefully, his hands shaking slightly. I need to tell you something too. Okay. I've been trying to convince myself that moving out would solve the problem. That if I put distance between us, these feelings would go away. Lucas met her eyes. But the truth is, I don't want them to go away. I don't want distance. I want… He stopped, suddenly afraid of saying too much. What do you want? Marianne's voice was barely above a whisper. You. I I want you. Lucas let out a shaky breath. I know it's a terrible idea. I know all the reasons it's impossible, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Marianne stood and crossed the space between them, sitting on the edge of the bed beside him. She reached up and cupped his face with one hand, her thumb brushing against his cheekbone. What if we didn't pretend? She said softly. What if we acknowledge that this is complicated and messy and potentially problematic, but we tried anyway? You're my boss. I am. And we'd need to be careful about that. Set boundaries at work. Maybe look into whether one of us should transfer departments. But that's logistics. That's solvable. Marianne's gray eyes searched his. The question is whether you think this, whatever this is between us, is worth solving those problems for. Lucas thought about the past 2 months, about morning coffees and garden afternoons and late-night conversations. He thought about the way Marianne looked at Noah with such tenderness, the way she'd made space in her carefully controlled life for them. He thought about how alive he felt when he was with her, how much less alone. Yes, he said, it's worth it. Marianne smiled, and Lucas felt something unlock in his chest. She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. He didn't. When her lips met his, it felt like coming home, gentle and certain, and right in a way that made all his careful arguments against this evaporate. They kissed slowly, carefully, mindful of Noah sleeping beside them. When they finally pulled apart, Marianne rested her forehead against his. We're really doing this? She whispered. I think we are. It's going to be complicated. I know. People at work will talk. Let them. Marianne pulled back slightly, studying his face. You're sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to just being boss and employee. Lucas thought about it for approximately half a second. I'm sure. They stayed up for another hour, talking through logistics and concerns and possibilities. They agreed to keep things private at work until they figured out the department transfer situation. They agreed to take things slowly, to prioritize Noah's well-being, to be honest with each other about concerns as they arose. They agreed that this was probably crazy, but they were going to try anyway. Finally, exhaustion won, and Lucas dozed off with Noah curled against his chest. He woke sometime before dawn to find Marianne asleep in the armchair, her tea gone cold beside her. She'd stayed, Lucas realized. Stayed to make sure they were okay. Stayed even after they'd crossed that significant line. Stayed because she wanted to. Lucas reached over and gently shook her awake. Marianne, go to bed. We're fine. She blinked at him groggily. What time is it? Almost 5. Noah's fever broke completely. We're both okay. Marianne stood stiffly, stretching. Then she leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to Lucas's forehead. I'm glad. After she left, Lucas lay in the darkness, holding his sleeping son, and tried to process everything that had happened. In the space of a few hours, his entire life had shifted. He was in a relationship with Marianne Cole. They were going to try to make this work despite all the complications. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely insane. And Lucas had never been more certain of anything in his life. Morning came too soon, pale sunlight filtering through unfamiliar curtains. Lucas woke to find Noah already awake, sitting up and babbling cheerfully at his own hands. The fever was completely gone, replaced by his son's usual energetic disposition. Lucas checked the time, 6:47 a.m., and realized they were still in Marianne's guest room, still in the house where everything had changed last night. He carried Noah to the bathroom and went through their morning routine in a daze, his mind replaying the kiss, the confession, the decision they'd made to try this impossible thing. In the clear light of day, doubt crept in. Had they been swept up in the moment? Had the stress of Noah's fever clouded their judgment? What were they actually doing? When Lucas emerged from the guest room, he found Marianne in her kitchen, already dressed for work in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in its usual severe style. She looked up when she heard them, and her expression softened immediately. How's he feeling? She asked, setting down her coffee mug. Perfect. Like nothing happened. Lucas shifted Noah to his other hip. Kids are resilient like that. And how are you feeling? The question carried weight beyond the obvious. Lucas met her eyes and saw the same uncertainty he felt reflected there. They were both wondering if last night had been real or just a fever dream brought on by stress and proximity. Confused, Lucas admitted, but not regretful. Marianne's shoulders relaxed fractionally. Good. Me neither. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. We should probably talk before work, but I have a meeting at 8:30. Tonight? Lucas suggested. After Noah's in bed? My place or yours? The question came out lighter than intended, and they both smiled at the absurdity of it. They lived in the same house, separated by a hallway and whatever boundaries they chose to maintain. Yours, Lucas said. 7:30? It's a date. Marianne paused, then laughed softly. That sounds so strange to say. Everything about this is strange. Lucas adjusted Noah, who was trying to grab Marianne's coffee mug. But strange doesn't always mean wrong. No, Marianne agreed, reaching out to gently touch Noah's cheek. Doesn't. The workday was an exercise in careful normalcy. Lucas arrived at the office at his usual time, settled into his desk, and tried to focus on the revenue projections that desperately needed his attention. But his concentration was shot. Every time Marianne walked past, every time he saw her through her office window, his mind drifted back to the feeling of her hand against his face, the certainty in her voice when she'd asked if he thought this was worth fighting for. Around 2 o'clock, Marcus stopped by Lucas's desk with a knowing look. Okay, what's going on with you? Marcus asked, perching on the edge of the desk. You've been staring at that same spreadsheet for 20 minutes without typing anything. Just tired, Lucas said. Noah had a fever last night, didn't get much sleep. Is he okay? Yeah, he's fine now, but you know how it is with sick kids. Every little thing feels catastrophic in the moment. Marcus nodded sympathetically. My sister's kids are the same way. One minute they're burning up, the next they're bouncing off the walls. He studied Lucas more closely. You sure that's all it is? You've got this weird energy today, like nervous energy. Lucas forced a laugh. It's nothing, just the usual stress. But Marcus wasn't buying it. Does this have anything to do with your living situation? The mysterious guest suite in Parkside that you won't tell anyone about? There's nothing mysterious about it. I'm renting a room from someone. End of story. Lucas, man, I've known you for 6 months. You're terrible at hiding things. Marcus lowered his voice. Whatever's going on, you know you can talk to me, right? I'm not going to judge. Lucas wanted to confide in someone, wanted to share the impossible situation he'd found himself in. But it felt too new, too fragile, too complicated to put into words yet. And there was Marianne's career to consider. If people found out they were involved before they'd worked out the professional complications, it could damage her reputation in ways Lucas didn't want to be responsible for. I appreciate that, Lucas said carefully. But there's really nothing to tell. I promise when there is, you'll be the first to know. Marcus looked skeptical, but dropped it. After he left, Lucas finally managed to focus on work, diving into the projections with enough intensity to make the afternoon pass quickly. By 5:15, he was packing up his desk when Marianne appeared beside him. Hale, a word in my office before you leave? Her tone was purely professional, but Lucas caught the slight quirk of her lips. He followed her, very aware of the curious glances from the few remaining co-workers. In her office, Marianne closed the door and immediately her posture relaxed. Hi, she said softly. Hi yourself. I've been thinking about tonight's conversation, about what we need to discuss. Marianne leaned against her desk. I think we should start with the practical things first. The work situation, the boundaries we need to set, the logistics of making this work without compromising either of our careers. Agreed, though I have to admit I have no idea what those logistics actually look like. Neither do I, but I think we need to figure it out together, with clear heads and honest communication. Marianne crossed her arms. I called HR earlier, confidentially, asked about their policy on workplace relationships between supervisors and direct reports. Lucas's stomach dropped. And? It's not forbidden, but it's strongly discouraged. They require disclosure and typically recommend department transfer for one of the parties involved. Marianne's expression was carefully neutral. The transfer would take about 6 weeks to arrange. In the meantime, we'd need to maintain strict professional boundaries at work and document everything to show no favoritism. You'd transfer me to another department. Actually, I was thinking I'd transfer myself. Marianne's lips curved into a small smile. I've been wanting to move into more strategic oversight anyway, less day-to-day management. There's an opening in corporate development that would be a lateral move for me and would mean I'm no longer your direct supervisor. Lucas stared at her, overwhelmed by the implication. You'd change positions because of this, because of us? I'd change positions because it makes sense for my career trajectory and happens to solve our immediate problem. It's not a sacrifice, Lucas. It's an opportunity. She moved closer to him. Unless you're having second thoughts? No, no second thoughts. Lucas struggled to articulate the feeling. I'm amazed that you're willing to restructure your career for something that started less than 12 hours ago. I'm not restructuring anything. I'm making a smart career move that also happens to allow me to pursue a relationship with someone I care about. Marianne reached out and took his hand. Stop thinking of this as me giving things up for you. Think of it as both of us choosing to make space for something we want. Lucas squeezed her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. When did you become an optimist? Right around the time an exhausted single father made a terrible joke in my car and somehow ended up changing my entire life. They stood there for a moment, hands linked, before the sound of footsteps in the hallway made them step apart. The reality of maintaining discretion settled over them like a blanket, necessary but confining. 7:30, Marianne reminded him. We'll figure this out. Lucas picked up Noah from daycare and walked home through the cooling evening, his son babbling excitedly about his day. The daycare teacher had reported that Noah had been perfectly fine, showing no signs of the previous night's fever. Children really were resilient in ways adults could never quite manage. At the suite, Lucas fed Noah dinner and went through their evening routine, bath time, pajamas, stories. By 7:15, Noah was drowsy and content in his crib, his small hand curled around his favorite stuffed elephant. Lucas stood watching him sleep for a moment, thinking about how much had changed since that rainy night when Marianne had offered him a ride home. At 7:30 exactly, Lucas knocked on the main house door. Marianne answered in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She'd changed from her work persona into something softer, more approachable, and Lucas felt his heart skip at the sight. Come in, she said, stepping aside. I made tea. Or there's wine if you prefer. Tea's good. They settled in the living room where just last night Noah had fallen asleep between them, where Marianne had confessed that she wanted him in her life. The memory of it felt both distant and immediate, like something that had happened years ago and just moments before. So, Marianne began, curling her legs under her on the couch. Let's start with the work situation, since that's the most concrete issue. Lucas nodded, grateful for the structure. You said you're planning to transfer to corporate development. When would that happen? I submitted the formal request this afternoon. Assuming it's approved, which it should be, the transition would start in about 6 weeks. During that time, we need to maintain complete professional separation at work. No private meetings unless they're documented and work-related, no special treatment, no indication of a personal relationship. That's going to be hard, Lucas admitted. I'm not good at hiding things. We're not hiding, we're being discreet. There's a difference. Marianne set down her tea. Once the transfer is complete, we can be more open, not necessarily announcing it to the whole office, but not actively concealing it either. What about living here? People are already curious about where I'm staying. That's trickier. Technically, there's nothing wrong with you renting my guest suite, but combined with a romantic relationship, it could look like favoritism or inappropriate conduct. Marianne frowned. Though I suppose you could always claim you found the place through a rental listing and didn't know who owned it initially. You want me to lie? I want us to be strategic about what information we share and when we share it. Marianne's voice was gentle but firm. Lucas, I know this feels dishonest, but the reality is that workplace relationships, especially between people at different levels, face a lot of scrutiny. We need to be smart about how we navigate this, or we could both end up facing consequences we don't deserve. Lucas knew she was right, but something about the calculation of it all made him uneasy. I don't want to start this relationship by deceiving people. We're not deceiving anyone about the important things. Your work performance speaks for itself. My decision to transfer is legitimately good for my career. The fact that we're also personally involved doesn't negate those truths. Marianne reached across the space between them and took his hand. I understand this is uncomfortable, but I need you to trust me on the professional navigation. I've been in corporate environments for 20 years. I know how to protect us both. Okay, Lucas said, though the unease didn't completely dissipate. I trust you. They spent the next hour mapping out boundaries and guidelines, how they'd interact at work, how they'd handle questions from colleagues, how they'd navigate the 6-week transition period. It felt clinical and pragmatic, more like a business negotiation than a conversation about a budding relationship. But Lucas understood the necessity. They were building a foundation, establishing rules that would protect what they were trying to create. Finally, Marianne set aside her notepad and looked at him with softer eyes. Okay, enough logistics. Can we talk about the actual relationship part now? Lucas laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Please, I was starting to feel like we were planning a corporate merger. In a way we are. Just a more intimate kind. Marianne shifted closer to him on the couch. So here's my question. What do you want this to be? Not in terms of logistics or work complications, but just between us? Lucas thought about it, trying to articulate feelings that were still forming. I want it to be real. Not something we're doing because it's convenient or because we're living in proximity. I want to actually date you, get to know you beyond the crisis management and late-night conversations. I want to see if this connection we've built can survive in normal circumstances. Define normal circumstances, Marianne said with a slight smile, because I'm not sure anything about our situation qualifies. Fair point, but you know what I mean, actual dates. Time together that isn't about Noah being sick or me being overwhelmed or you needing someone to talk to about your ex-husband. Lucas took her hand. I want to know what it's like to just be with you when neither of us is in crisis mode. I'd like that too. Marianne laced her fingers through his. Though I have to warn you, I'm terrible at dating. I haven't done it in over a decade, and I wasn't particularly good at it even then. I'm not exactly an expert either. My last relationship ended with my girlfriend abandoning our newborn son. Lucas shook his head. We'll figure it out together. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from serious to playful and back again. Marianne shared stories about her disastrous dating history in her 20s, and Lucas told her about the time he tried to impress a girl in college by cooking dinner and ended up setting off the fire alarm. They laughed and teased and gradually relaxed into each other, the earlier tension giving way to something easier, more natural. Around 10 o'clock, Lucas's phone chimed with the baby monitor app. Noah was stirring, making the small sounds that usually preceded a full wake-up. I should go check on him, Lucas said reluctantly. Or you could bring him over here, Marianne suggested. If he can't settle, I mean. No reason you have to deal with it alone. Lucas smiled. You might regret that offer. Sometimes he's up for hours. Then we'll be up for hours together. Noah turned out to be easily soothed, accepting a bottle and falling back asleep within 20 minutes. But Lucas didn't return to the suite. Instead, he and Marianne settled on the couch with Noah drowsing between them, watching an old movie neither of them had seen before. It felt domestic and comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Sometime after midnight, Lucas dozed off with his head against Marianne's shoulder. He woke to find her gently shaking him, her voice soft in his ear. Lucas, you should get Noah to bed properly. Lucas blinked awake, disoriented. Noah was sound asleep in Marianne's arms, his small body completely relaxed. The movie had long since ended, leaving the screen dark. Sorry, Lucas mumbled. Didn't mean to fall asleep. Don't apologize. You needed it. Marianne carefully transferred Noah to Lucas's arms. Same time tomorrow? Are you asking me on a date, Miss Cole? I believe I am, Mr. Hale. Lucas carried Noah back to the suite, his heart feeling lighter than it had in months. This thing with Marianne was complicated and risky and probably inadvisable, but standing there in the quiet darkness with his son sleeping peacefully in his arms, Lucas couldn't bring himself to regret it. The following weeks fell into a new rhythm. At work, Lucas and Marianne maintained scrupulous professional boundaries, their interactions limited to necessary business discussions. It was harder than Lucas had anticipated, seeing her across the office and not being able to smile freely, having meetings where he had to call her Ms. Cole and pretend they hadn't spent the previous evening talking until 2 in the morning. But the evenings made up for it. After Noah was in bed, Lucas would go to the main house and they'd cook dinner together, or watch movies, or simply talk for hours. They went on actual dates too, carefully planned outings to restaurants in neighboring towns where no one from work would see them, walks through parks on weekends while Noah napped in his stroller, quiet afternoons in museums where they could hold hands without worrying about running into colleagues. Lucas learned that Marianne was a terrible dancer but loved music, that she dreamed of being a concert pianist before pragmatism led her to business school, that she had a younger sister she adored but rarely saw. Marianne learned that Lucas could quote entire episodes of trashy reality TV shows, that he'd once wanted to study marine biology, that his relationship with his father was complicated by years of benign neglect. They learned how to be together in ways that weren't about crisis or necessity. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, quirks. Lucas discovered that Marianne was grumpy in the mornings until she'd had coffee, that she liked to solve problems by talking through them out loud, that she had a wicked sense of humor hidden beneath her serious exterior. Marianne discovered that Lucas was quietly stubborn about things that mattered to him, that he showed love through acts of service, that he could make her laugh in ways no one else ever had. And through it all, Noah became the bridge between them. Marianne was wonderful with him, patient and playful, willing to read the same book 17 times in a row, genuinely delighted by his small accomplishments. She was there when Noah took his first steps at 10 months old, catching him when he stumbled into her arms. She was there for his first word beyond mama and dada, which turned out to be mare, his attempt at her name that made her eyes shine with unexpected tears. 6 weeks passed faster than Lucas expected. Marianne's transfer to corporate development was approved and finalized. She was no longer his direct supervisor, which meant they could finally stop hiding at work. The relief of it was palpable. The first day after the transfer was official, Marianne stopped by Lucas's desk mid-morning with coffee, something she'd never done before when their relationship needed to stay secret. "Peace offering," she said, setting the cup down. "I know I've been particularly demanding on the Morrison project." "No more than usual," Lucas said, accepting the coffee with a smile. Then, because he could now, he added, "Thank you, Marianne." Several coworkers glanced over at the use of her first name, but no one said anything. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, but it felt monumental. That evening, Lucas suggested they tell Marcus. He was Lucas's closest friend at work, and keeping the secret from him had been eating at Lucas's conscience. "Are you sure?" Marianne asked. They were in her kitchen, making dinner while Noah banged enthusiastically on a pot with a wooden spoon. "Once we tell people, we can't untell them." "I know, but Marcus has been a good friend to me. I hate deceiving him." Lucas paused in his chopping. "And honestly, I'm tired of hiding. I want people to know that I'm with you, that you're important to me." Marianne crossed to the kitchen and wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Okay, we'll tell him. Just be prepared for questions." Lucas invited Marcus over for dinner the following Saturday, explaining that there was something he wanted to share. Marcus arrived at 6:30, visibly curious, his eyes widening when he saw the house. "Okay, this is definitely not just renting a room," Marcus said, stepping inside the guest suite. "Lucas, what's going on?" "Come in, sit down, I'll explain everything." Over dinner, which Marianne joined them for, Lucas told Marcus the whole story. The rainy night, the desperate joke, the offer of the guest suite. The way proximity had become friendship had become something more. The complications of the work situation and the transfer that had solved them. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and finally something that looked like happiness. So you're together? Marcus asked, looking between them. "Like, actually dating?" "Yes," Marianne said simply, reaching over to take Lucas's hand on top of the table. "And you're okay with this? Both of you? No weird power dynamic stuff?" "We've been very careful about that," Lucas assured him. Marianne transferred to a different department specifically to eliminate any supervisory relationship. At work, we're colleagues. Here, we're... He glanced at Marianne. "What are we exactly?" "Happy," Marianne said softly. "We're happy." Marcus studied them for a long moment, then his face broke into a genuine smile. You know what? I can see it. You're good together. And Lucas, man, I've never seen you look this relaxed. Not since you started at Meridian. It's amazing what happens when you're not commuting 3 hours a day and actually sleeping, Lucas said wryly. It's not just that. You look happy. Actually happy, not just surviving. Marcus raised his glass. To unexpected love stories and bosses who turn out to be decent humans. I'm sitting right here, Marianne said, but she was smiling. They told people gradually after that. A few close colleagues, some of Marianne's friends outside work, Lucas's sister who lived across the country and immediately demanded photos. The reactions ranged from surprise to supportive, with only a few raised eyebrows about the unconventional beginning. The office gossip mill churned for about a week before moving on to more interesting scandals. And Lucas realized that most people didn't care nearly as much as he'd feared. They were two adults who'd found each other. The details of how and where didn't matter nearly as much as the fact that they were clearly good together. 3 months after Marianne's transfer, Lucas got a promotion. He'd been working on a particularly complex analysis of market trends, and his insights had led to a major strategic shift that saved the company millions. His new position came with a significant raise and more responsibility, enough that he could finally afford to think about getting his own place. But when he mentioned it to Marianne one evening, she looked genuinely upset. You want to move out? I just thought, with the raise, I could afford something decent now. I don't need to impose on your space anymore. Lucas Hale. If you think you've been imposing, then I've done a terrible job communicating. Marianne set down the book she'd been reading. You and Noah aren't guests here. This is your home. I want it to be your home. But the guest suite was always temporary, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to leave the property. Marianne took a breath, and Lucas recognized the expression she got when she was about to say something important. What if you didn't move out? What if instead we made this official? Moved you into the main house properly, turned the guest suite into something else, and just lived together? As a family? Lucas felt his heart stutter. Marianne, are you asking me to move in with you? We already live together. I'm asking you to stop treating this like a temporary arrangement and commit to building a life here. With me. She reached for his hand. I know it's fast. We've only been officially together for 3 months, but we've been living in each other's space for 6 months before that, and I know how I feel. I want you here. I want Noah here. I want to wake up to the sound of him laughing and fall asleep knowing you're just down the hall. I want this to be permanent. Lucas thought about the tiny apartment he'd left behind, about the exhaustion and loneliness that had defined his life before Marianne. He thought about the past 6 months, the stability, the support, the way his life had transformed from barely surviving to actually thriving. Yes, he said simply. Yes, let's make it permanent. Marianne's smile was radiant. She kissed him, soft and sure, and Lucas felt something settle in his chest, the last piece of uncertainty finally clicking into place. They spent the next month reconfiguring the house. Lucas's belongings moved from the guest suite into Marianne's bedroom, which became their shared space. Noah got his own proper nursery, decorated with ocean themes because Lucas finally admitted his abandoned dream of marine biology, and Marianne insisted they honor it. The guest suite was converted into a home office for Lucas, a space where he could work on his MBA that Marianne had encouraged him to pursue. 1 year after that rainy night when Lucas had made his desperate joke, they celebrated Noah's 2nd birthday in the garden. The party was small. Marcus and a few colleagues, Marianne's sister and her kids, Mrs. Chen, who'd kept Noah safe through those early difficult months. Noah toddled around with frosting-covered hands, delighted by the attention and the presents. Lucas stood watching his son play. Marianne's arm wrapped around his waist and marveled at how dramatically life could change. A year ago, he'd been drowning in exhaustion and desperation, barely holding himself together. Now he had a home, a partner, a future that felt bright and possible. What are you thinking about? Marianne asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. About how much can change in a year. About how I almost didn't get in your car that night. But you did. Marianne squeezed his waist. You made a terrible joke and inadvertently changed both our lives. Best terrible joke I ever made. Noah chose that moment to run over, demanding to be picked up. Lucas lifted him, and Noah immediately smeared frosting on both their faces before giggling maniacally. "He's your son," Marianne said, laughing as she wiped frosting off her cheek. "He's got your troublemaking streak." "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm a paragon of proper behavior. You literally stole my stapler yesterday just to watch me search for it. That's called keeping you on your toes." They dissolved into laughter, Noah joining in even though he didn't understand the joke. Around them, the party continued, friends and family celebrating a little boy who'd brought them all together in unexpected ways. Later that night, after the guests had left and Noah was asleep in his ocean-themed nursery, Lucas and Marianne sat in the garden under the stars. It was the same spot where they'd had their first real conversation outside of work, where Lucas had first realized he was developing feelings he shouldn't have. "I need to tell you something," Marianne said, her voice soft in the darkness. Lucas felt a flutter of apprehension. "Okay. I talked to my therapist this week about the whole choosing career over family thing that my ex-husband always threw at me." She paused. She pointed out that I didn't actually choose career over family. I chose honesty over pretending to be someone I'm not. And that what I have now, with you and Noah, is a family. Just a different kind than what my ex-husband wanted. Lucas took her hand. "It is a family, a real one. I know that now. But it took me a long time to believe it was okay. That I could have meaningful relationships even if they didn't look conventional. That loving you and Noah didn't require me to sacrifice my career or pretend to be someone I'm not." Marianne turned to face him. "You've given me permission to be exactly who I am while still having connection and love. That's not something I ever thought was possible." "You've given me the same thing," Lucas said quietly. "Before you, I thought asking for help was weakness. I thought I had to do everything alone to prove I was a good father. You showed me that accepting support doesn't diminish me. It just makes me more able to show up for the people I love." They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked, looking up at the stars. Somewhere in the house, the baby monitor crackled softly, Noah making small sleeping sounds. "I love you," Marianne said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, though the feeling had been evident for months. "I love you too," Lucas replied, equally certain. The words hung in the night air between them, simple and true. They'd built something remarkable from the wreckage of Lucas's desperate situation and Marianne's isolated existence. They'd turned a careless joke into a foundation for a life together. 2 years later, Lucas finished his MBA and accepted a position as senior analyst at a competing firm, a move that eliminated any remaining whispers about favoritism or improper conduct. Marianne had been promoted to VP of Corporate Strategy, a role that suited her perfectly. Noah started preschool and became obsessed with dinosaurs, then space, then, for some inexplicable reason, garbage trucks. They got married on a quiet Saturday afternoon in the garden where they'd first acknowledged their feelings for each other. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, with Noah as the ring bearer, a job he took very seriously until he got distracted by a butterfly halfway down the aisle. Standing there exchanging vows, Lucas thought back to that rainy night in Marianne's car, to the moment of desperation that had led to his terrible joke. He thought about how close he'd come to refusing her help, to letting pride and fear keep him isolated. He thought about all the small moments that had built into this life. Morning coffee conversations, late-night talks, Noah's first steps into Marianne's waiting arms. "I can't promise this will always be easy," Lucas said during his vows, speaking from the heart rather than the carefully prepared speech. "But I can promise I'll keep showing up. I'll keep being honest about what I need and what I can give. I'll keep choosing us every single day." "I promise the same," Marianne replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I promise to make space for you and Noah in my life, not as an obligation but as the greatest joy I've ever known. I promise to keep being the person you fell in love with while growing into the person we both need me to be." They kissed while Noah made exaggerated gagging sounds, and Marcus cheered and Marianne's sister cried happy tears. And Lucas felt the last piece of his old life, the fear and loneliness and desperate struggle, finally fall away completely. Years later, long after Noah had grown into a bright, curious teenager who split his interests between marine biology and computer programming, Lucas would sometimes think back to that rainy night. He'd think about the question that had slipped out unbidden. Is there room for two? And how it had changed the entire trajectory of his life. The answer, it turned out, had been yes. There was room for two, and eventually room for three, when Marianne surprised them all by suggesting they adopt a daughter who needed a home. There was room for all the messy, complicated, beautiful pieces of a life built on honesty and mutual support, and the courage to accept help when you needed it most. Lucas never did become a marine biologist, but he did take Noah on annual trips to study coral reefs, fulfilling that old dream in a different way. And Marianne never did become the stay-at-home parent her ex-husband had wanted, but she became something better. A partner who showed up fully as herself, who loved fiercely while maintaining her own identity, who proved that family could take infinite forms as long as it was built on genuine connection. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the garden where they'd married. Noah was 12 now, their daughter Emma was 7, and the house had evolved to accommodate their growing family. But the garden remained mostly unchanged, still peaceful, still beautiful, still the place where everything had begun to shift. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked, pulling Marianne close. "Taking a chance on a desperate single father who made a terrible joke?" Marianne laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not even for a second. You're still terrible at jokes, though." "Hey, that joke got me you. I'd say it was pretty effective." "It got you a ride home. Everything else you earned by being exactly who you are, stubborn and caring and brave enough to accept help when you needed it most." Lucas kissed her temple, watching Noah and Emma play tag around the oak tree. "I was just trying to survive." "We were both just trying to survive," Marianne corrected. "The difference is, we learned to survive together. And somewhere along the way, survival became living. And living became this." She gestured to the garden, the house, the children, the life they'd built from those first uncertain moments. Lucas understood what she meant. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was joy, messy and imperfect, and more real than anything he'd imagined possible during those dark days of exhaustion and loneliness. That terrible joke in the rain hadn't been the beginning of their story. It had been the beginning of Lucas learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. Sometimes strength means accepting kindness instead of fighting through alone. Sometimes the people who seem most distant are the ones who understand you best. And sometimes a careless question asked in desperation can open a door to a life more full and rich and beautiful than you ever dreamed possible. Lucas held Marianne close and watched their children play and felt nothing but gratitude for that rainy night, that desperate moment, that terrible joke that had saved his life in ways he never could have predicted. He'd asked if there was room for two, expecting rejection or pity. Instead, he'd found a partner who created space not just for him and Noah, but for all the complicated, messy, beautiful pieces of becoming a family. There was room for two, and then there was room for more. And the house that had once been too big for one lonely woman became exactly the right size for all of them together, building a life defined not by what they'd lost, but by what they'd found in each other: acceptance, partnership, and a love that had grown from the simple act of one person seeing another's struggle and choosing to help. That, Lucas thought, was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but consistent choice to show up for each other day after day, building something sturdy and true from the foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. It was what he and Marianne had built, and what they would continue building for all the years to come.